This meeting is being recorded.
I always love when they yell that at the beginning.
Over here.
Being recorded, you're being live streamed, being watched
Yes.
everywhere. All right. Yeah. So welcome, Sarah. Thank you for joining us today. And for anyone who's in the group who's watching or later on YouTube, if you haven't met me yet, I'm Corey Walmsley. I'm the CEO of Aurora Borealis Publishing. And today we have a special guest with us. This is Sarah Ramsey, and she is a two-time author. Just two, right?
That's two for now. Though I had someone today say, okay, so your third book, if you could really write this, that would be great. And I was like, no, I'm just a break.
It's time for a break here. So this is Sarah Ramsey, and I'm going to let her introduce herself and tell you a little bit about who she is. But of course, the reason why we are interviewing her is because of her experience, not only with being an author, writing books, all that good stuff, but also her problem solving skills, because writing a book tends to be a really huge problem, a challenge for a lot of people. And I wanted to get the perspective of a problem solving expert on this. So welcome, Sarah. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, my name is Sarah. My latest book is Problem Solved: Simple Habits for Complex Decisions. And you can see this can you see the glare? You can see this lovely little maze. And this book is like, if your brain feels like a maze, or your brain feels like what I call, it's caught in spaghetti thinking, right? So it's like, well, do I write this chapter first? Or, do I hire this editor? Or do I have to have my cover design? Or, do I have to have this character developed? Right. That's what I call spaghetti thinking. Mm-hmm. And it's like all our thinking or problems are wrapped up together. And so we don't know which noodle to pull out first to be able to move forward. And the book talks about moving your thinking from spaghetti to waffles. And if you think about eating a waffle, it's very easy to take one bite at a time, right? And my mother, whenever she has the grandkids over, she has to cut the spaghetti before she puts the sauce on it, right? So she gets the noodles and she literally gets scissors and cuts the spaghetti so it doesn't end up all over her couch cushion. Well, we're not eating on the couch, but her seat cushions and all that kind of stuff, right? And we think about that with spaghetti, right? It's messy. And if you're stuck in spaghetti thinking, you're probably working very hard, but you've not found a way to move forward. Right. So if you're the person who's like, oh yeah, I've been thinking about writing a book for 2 years or whatever, and you haven't, or I've got a book, but I haven't put it out there yet, right? All these types of things. That's where the spaghetti thinking comes from, or the maze. The maze looks a lot better on the book cover front. I could have had a plate of spaghetti, but that's not nearly as cute. So
I love the maze.
Thank you. Yes. And that's it. It's really thinking about even if you're putting syrup in a waffle square, it's like, okay, I can do this one square, then I can move on to the next thing, then I can move on to the next thing. And then you get to the end of the row, or you've eaten the whole waffle, or you've written the whole book. And I did 2 books in 2 years. 2 books in 2 years. Yeah. I mean, literally, my cousin, I was talking about some parenting stuff today. She goes, oh my gosh, that's what your next book should be about. And I was like, no, not yet. But, and I have a top ranking podcast. The Toxic Person Proof podcast is a top ranking podcast, and was running a business and having children, and had children, continued to raise them. And, this method of really learning how to break out my thinking and break down my thinking to do the next right thing is really what made it all possible.
I love that. I actually, I think there was a comedian a few years ago who referred to waffles as little syrup traps. And that, as soon as you told me, when we had our first conversation about the spaghetti versus waffles, that's what I was thinking about. They're little syrup traps. Waffles aren't messy and they're so organized. So I love that analogy. It's just so wonderful, especially when you're thinking about a book. And if you're doing a book, it's already kind of compartmentalized. You've already got chapter. So it should make it seem like it's a little bit easier, but then we do get caught in that overwhelm and thinking about oh my God, I got to create this whole big thing. So yeah, so I'm really glad that we're going to be talking about this today. And I wanted to start out by talking about like what made you want to actually start writing books? Because I know you did, was it Toxic Person Proof was your first one? And
My
then,
first
oh, you
becoming
got that one
toxic
too?
proof, right?
Yes.
And it was funny. People are like, you did a book about toxic people and then about decision making, like within 2 years, like what happened? And the within if you've been in controlling relationships, or had a controlling parent or partner, or or you're a people pleaser, right? And the way you typically make decisions is, how do I not make this person mad? How do I not upset people? How do I follow the rules? How do I get it right? Like that was how people were making decisions. That's not helpful when it comes to, how do I break down writing a book? How do I build a business? How do I parent a child? How do I, right? It's and I'm not blaming our parents. The society before us, all of us were raised with parents who did not have the internet,
Mhm.
right? And so now we have information at our fingertips, but then we get stuck in overwhelm or spaghetti thinking, right? Because it's like, there are no rules anymore. You don't have to be a teacher just because your parents were a teacher, or a farmer just because your parents were a farmer, right? Like we
Mhm.
really have more choices, and those choices are very overwhelming. So it was a very obvious thing I was helping my clients with, and they started to get promotions and all this kind of stuff. And I really, oh gosh, this book nearly killed me. I mean, I say it all the time, but really it's just like, oh my word, it was so difficult on me. It was
Yeah.
so hard. It felt like, because I was, working with my clients in this process, and it was so, okay, the problem I'm trying to solve is this. Here's the steps I need to do. And they were just able to move forward on very complicated decisions.
Mhm.
And I was like, oh man, I'm gonna have to write a book on this. So it felt like I don't want to say a burden, but kind of a burden, and very much like a responsibility. Like it was my
Yeah.
responsibility to put this out into the world. And I didn't feel like that with my first book. The first book, it was kind of, it'd be awesome to write a book, and this is what I'm teaching, and this is kind of the concepts I've come up with. But this second book, it felt like, it did not feel like a choice. It felt like a purpose or an obligation, which was very stressful. It was very stressful. My first book did very well, and so I had that added pressure. The first book, it's kind of like, if it goes well or doesn't, there's not
Yeah.
there's not much pressure there. But the second book felt like I had, you know, to get another home run. It wasn't just
Right,
enough.
right. Yeah, that can be really tough. So that adds just another noodle to the whole bundle, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Um, so after you said that, like I'm understanding the connection between the toxic person proof thing and the problem solve thing, because of the way that people are wired to think. Like we really do need to kind of figure out how to get out of, being around the toxic people and get out of that way of thinking too. So I really
Mhm.
like that. That's really interesting.
Thank
Um,
you.
yeah, and I was kind of wondering, we've talked a good bit about like the structure of your book, Problem Solved, and kind of some of the different things in there. So I was curious how you came up with the structure, the concept, all of that kind of stuff.
So one of the most important things that I do, what I feel like my real zone of genius is putting these labels or concepts and things that people instantly understand what I'm talking about before I say it. Like when I say, take your thinking from spaghetti to waffles, I'm quite certain that you did not hear that a year ago, but
No.
yet you knew what I was saying,
Yeah.
right? So I'm already, it's like if I'm trying to like do a touchdown, I start at the 50 or 75 yard line, rather than starting at the 0 yard line, explaining this new concept. And
Mm,
this was especially important as I was trying to unravel overwhelm,
okay.
right?
Yeah.
I'm writing a book about not being confused. That is confusing. Right?
Yeah.
Right, because I have to model what confusion looks like, and then what a
Right.
lack of confusion looks like. So
Mm,
I had told you before that I rewrote the chapter on spaghetti and waffles for a year.
yes.
And I ran it through all these beta groups. Like, okay, what do you think about this? What do you think
Yeah.
about this? I had one person who read my first book, and she goes, this book isn't funny, Sarah. Your first book was really funny, and this was like a textbook. So I went back and like made it
Yeah.
very similar in style to my first book, so it is funny now. So within the concept of the spaghetti and waffles, it was just another draft, and so I thought it was going to print. I was ready to go, and I gave it to my high school English teacher to look at.
Okay.
And she said, "I hate this." She goes, "I like your whole book, except for this chapter." And it was like the main concept of the whole chapter, right? And it was just very hard to write because I'm unraveling overwhelm,
Right.
right? That's very hard to write, right?
Yeah.
I know in my head, but how do you understand it in a way? So I rewrote that chapter at the very end and just like sent it off to print. And I'm really happy with how it turned out. But just that process of like getting feedback,
Yeah.
taking the feedback, not having hurt feelings over the feedback,
Yeah.
and that is something that's probably that was the hardest thing about the first book is that it was written during COVID. And so I had a lot of people willing to do beta reading for me because they were kind of stuck in their house, and
Yeah.
it was a great time. So they
Yeah.
were very kind and wonderful, but no one prepares you emotionally for like opening your email and there being another red mark pin like all the
Yeah.
time.
Oh,
Right. So it wasn't just my editor, it was like these beta readers, and then it would go to my editor again. Right. And that was emotionally difficult the first book. It wasn't as emotionally difficult the second book because I
right.
knew that my reviews would be nice.
Yeah.
Right. If my reviews from, were hard on the front end, I would have positive reviews on the
Right.
back end. So that process was really important to me. And one of the concepts in the book is about separating the emotional problems to solve from the practical problems to solve.
Okay.
Okay. And it's like one of the concepts in the book, I talk about a fear of writing. Okay. Because I talk about all kinds of problems in the book. And one of the problems is that. And it's like, okay, so what problem are you trying to solve? And they'll say, "Oh, I'm just so nervous. What if people don't like the book? What if this?" And I said, "But you haven't written it yet. So why don't you write the book and then you can solve the problem of deciding to put it out in the world later." Right? Like waffle out the problem, right?
Yeah.
There's writing of the book and then there's the publishing of the book. Two different things.
Right.
Right? So in those emotional hurdles that we all have to kind of trick ourselves in this process of being human, through these emotional hurdles, you can do these little tricks for yourself. And then it's like, oh, well, the book's written. I might as well put it out now. Right.
Yeah.
And then it's much easier. It's breaking down overwhelm.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And that is absolutely something that I hear a lot is people saying like, oh, I don't know if I want to write a book because I don't know if it's going to be a success. And it's like, okay, you are so far away from what the other end of it is that, how can you even say, well, why bother doing this when, there's all these steps in between to get to the success. And yeah, so I like how you put that would be very helpful for people to, I hope everybody's watching this.
They can't see it, right? Like,
Right.
I'm reading a book called Walking the Tiger about somatic healing therapy and that type of thing, because nerd. And but it's talking about our brains are designed to keep us alive and to survive, not necessarily to make us happy.
Okay.
And that shows up in so many areas when it comes to writing or putting ourselves out there, or anything that we could be ridiculed, because it's easier. It's like, no, I'm gonna just like hide in my house and not put myself out there. And
Right.
I was eating old videos today, and I would just like, oh gosh, Sarah, you sound so terrible, or why did you say that? This is what it is, guys. It just is what it is. But I want to leave a legacy. I wanted, if something happened to me, for my children to have something they could hold on to. That was my words and my teachings. And I mean, they're little now, who knows if they'll ever read it, but it was important for me to have something that I left my mark on the world.
Yeah. And I think that's a really common thing that people want to make their mark and they want to say, generations down the line, like, oh, here's your great grandmother's book. Here's something that she had to say. Look at her wisdom, and to, keep inspiring. If not within your family, within other people's families too. So yeah, and I think that that can also be a hang up for people. Like, I'm going to leave this book here, even when I'm gone. People are going to be able to judge me after I'm gone. Things that I said, when I was in my 30s, my 40s, my 50s, whatever it is. So I think that gets to be another, if people are looking at that huge, huge, huge picture, and that can make them stop too. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, well, that's what I call an emotional elephant. And so it's funny that you were like this huge, huge, huge picture. So I told you my book was funny. Well, one of the things I do in the process of just my life in general is I keep hold of funny stories. So funny things people say or funny memories to be able to use them as teaching points. Okay. So when I was little, I walked by my parents' TV and I saw America's Funniest Home Videos on their television. Okay. Kind of looking over and I saw this man and he's sweeping up behind an elephant and the elephant sits on his head.
Okay.
And I remember thinking, that has to be the worst way to die ever. Like, here lies Sarah. She died in an elephant's butthole. Like, I remember just thinking, like, oh, 9 years old or something. It was just terribly tragic. But it's a great teaching point, exactly what you said about if we feed our fears and they get bigger and bigger and bigger, and they are in front of us, we are behind our fears. We're either getting pooped on or sat on. And it's smelly back there.
Yeah.
Right? The only happy option is to be on top of the elephant, on top of your fears, or in front of the elephant, in front of your fears. There is nothing good behind the elephant. You're getting smacked with their tail, whatever it is back there, right? And so that was one of the funny stories that I was like, how am I going to explain this concept of fear? And I was like, oh yeah, and that's the opening of chapter 4, right? But just an illustration of if we feed our fears, so they get bigger and bigger. Okay. And of course we're human. Of course we're going to have fears, but we want to start solving our emotional problems and practical problems like as two train tracks running alongside each other rather than being T-shaped. Okay. So if I say, hey, what someone may think about me, I can't write my book today because what someone may think about me 200 years from now, I wouldn't be comfortable with. That's like your elephant. You're putting this huge elephant to block yourself, right? Fear is that T-shaped and you can't get through the practical problem to solve, which is, can you put 1,000 words on a page today? Right. And that's one of the biggest concepts in the book, because if you start to just, okay, there's an emotional problem and there's a practical problem, and we're just going to solve them simultaneously rather than blocking ourselves with that emotional elephant.
I love it. That's and I remember you telling me that story before, and that is just hilarious.
You can still see it if you want to see it on YouTube. Don't shut out this interview, but you can still see it.
I can picture that, and it's great too because you can picture that with your fears. It is the perfect analogy for that. We all, hide behind our fears, and we're going to get sit on or pooped on. So
there's nothing good happening behind an elephant.
No. I did want to kind of change gears a little bit here because you had mentioned before that you did a lot of interviews for your book. And I know that can be another huge thing because everybody wants to put something out that is, respected and done well. And, a lot of times that involves research, that involves interviews, that involves, something beyond just opening up and dumping all the words out of our heads. So how did you handle the interview process? Like what kind of structure did you have? Did you set out and say, all right, I'm going to interview 5 people, and how did you handle it?
Really, so my master's degree is in library science, which is basically like a research degree, right? So I feel like my life has been a research project for a long time. So that is very habitual. I told you about keeping notes on my phone, right? So when people, it would just be an average conversation. Sometimes it would be like, hey, what problem are you trying to solve, right? And they would tell me. I would have interviews with my clients. I would even ask on Facebook, what do you hear people complaining about right now? And I mean, I say a year, and that I knew I was going to write this book. And I had a client who sent me a video of myself from 2 years ago where I was talking about writing this book before I knew I was going to write this book. So it really has been years and years of research coming into this. But I think getting too caught up in the process can be preventative,
Okay.
right? And if you are hearing two coworkers speak and you hear a leader navigate this coworker's problem well, or navigate this coworker's problem well, that can be data for you, right? It's like, okay, how would I break down that problem? How would my strategy apply to that problem, right? Or I had a lady, she was a director at a large credit card company, and she took this to her younger employees because a lot of employees in their 20s and stuff are struggling with overwhelm as they get into the big grown-up world. And she goes, "You wouldn't believe the light bulbs that come on." And I was like, "What did you say? How did they react?
Yeah.
What outcome did you have?" Right. And so it was, I mean, it was a real pain in the neck, but it was a lot of formal and informal
Okay.
research, because I am a big believer in somebody, you're at a family function and somebody says a funny story, you want to
Yeah.
write it down. Or somebody says a problem, you're like, oh, I had someone I know. It's really interesting with like my friends and family, because I want to be really careful to not apply my strategies on them all the time, like, because that's really inappropriate and boundary issues out the wazoo and not okay.
Yeah.
But I had someone making a really big decision, and I was like, well, there's not a perfect option. Like, there's a consequence to every option. So you're stalling out, right? And so it's they were trying to decide about kids at school, right? Public school, private school, this kind of thing. And they were looking for like, okay, the perfect option that will make everything easy. It's
Okay.
like, well, it doesn't exist. So, and then those are just regular conversations that turn into data for the book. And so
Yeah.
I hate to say everything, but that is, I see a lot of people stall out in the process. And the problem you're trying to solve is to get information.
Mhm.
It doesn't have to be the perfect way to get information,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, it sounds like you kind of set an intention to, do the book, to have interviews, to have information, and then you were just open to wherever it was coming from. So then
Very much.
whenever you did catch that conversation, your brain automatically went, hey, that's fodder for the book. Hey, that's something I need to include. So it seemed like a more relaxed and organic process than like, I'm going to do 30 interviews and I'm going to reach out to these people.
Mhm.
Is that?
Now, yes, very much so. And now
Okay.
I did ask my clients how they were using this concept in their work life, right? Because a lot of my conversations, I would have track our conversations, but then I would say, when you go implement this and you say you love what I do and you love this process, why?
Mhm.
What happened? What outcome did you get? How much
Mhm.
time did it save you? And it was a confusing book even to market, because it's like, okay, it will improve everything. And they tell you not to write a book for everyone and
Right.
everything, right?
Right.
It's the worst strategy ever, but it's like, I'm asking my ladies because I've done a program with this too, with the
Yeah.
problem solve process and like a coaching program. I'm like, how much time do you think this saved you? How much stress do you think this saved you? And they're
Yeah.
like, hours. I'm like, how many hours? Because you want to
Yeah.
be really honest, right? You want to be really honest. And it's like, then there's that piece of like, this is for everyone to improve everything, but
Yeah.
we did not have a decision-making framework taught to us in school,
Right.
right? We make 35,000 decisions a day. Burnout's the biggest buzzword right now. Okay. And
Yeah.
everybody's solution to burnout is to work less during inflation.
Yeah. That doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense, right? It's like, oh, really? Like, that's the only solution for burnout
Yeah.
is to work. And I do love getting my sleep at night. I do love yoga. I am going to Mexico to an all-inclusive tomorrow to vacation. I love all that stuff, but
Right.
I get crap done. right? And when we need that piece of our lives, our kids need that piece of us. Like our kids need parents who are active and productive and not overwhelmed, right? And your future readers need that, and your business needs that. So you can see why I was so passionate
Oh,
about
yeah.
get out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you do need this for every single thing that you're doing. You need to have a way to cut the distance between point A and point B. And it makes sense. A lot of the distance between point A and point B is running in place.
And there's a difference in movement and motion.
Yeah.
Right. And I see a lot of people in motion. They're just like going around in circles. In the book, I use the example of a race car driver, right? And most of us are in race car driver mode, right? We're burning gas, we're burning money,
Yeah.
we're going in circles, and it's a high pressure situation. Like being a race car driver is hard on our nervous system, right? It's not relaxed. It's not,
Right.
so you see that burnout happening rather than being, in true movement, which is moving forward, moving towards your goals, moving towards outcomes, building your business, building your relationships, building your health, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But that circle thing,
No.
that's burnout.
So all of that said, looking at how you handled your book, how did you take the overwhelm of the book and kind of turn it into waffle into little syrup traps? How did you
Yes,
do that?
definitely. I'm a huge fan of a book outline. I mean, I know that sounds like so silly but it is like, that was the key for me, right? It was like, I had thought, oh, I should write a book. And I had a distant cousin write a book, and I saw her book outline. I was like, oh, I can do that. Right. And I would say too, like, not being a perfectionist in what goes on the page or what goes on the outline. Like, you can move things around, it's a very movable process. Because I think where people get stuck is like, well, if I make that chapter 4, it's going to be chapter 4 forever, right? And that's not it. Like, the goal is to get it out of your head and onto paper. Like, that's the only problem to solve: out of your head, onto paper. Then if you want to move around the paper or rewrite a chapter for a year or add a brand new chapter, I added the chapter on emotional elephants after I was running people through this. Oh, part of my research I did do, as I was running coaching programs on this, I did all these beta groups because I wanted to test out my explanations so there was no confusion. And I wanted to see where there was going to be confusion in their thinking processes, which is where the emotional and practical problem to solve came in. Because they were like, well, what do we do about this? And then it's like, okay, I obviously need a new teaching point on that. And then that became the layers of chapters in that outline. So the emotional elephants piece was not on my original outline. And it's okay.
Yeah.
And it was added because it was absolutely necessary. And that's okay. Right? It doesn't mean my first outline was wrong. It meant that I continued to research and continued to ask questions. And even in podcasts and stuff, I would test out what people immediately understood.
Okay.
Right? So you can test out with your friends and family. If I say spaghetti thinking to waffle thinking, people understood what I was saying. If I said, you don't want to get behind an emotional elephant, I'm already at the 50 or 75 yard. I've already got you quite a bit of a ways there. And I would just test out things in conversations to see what people's reactions were, to see if they knew. So to say how I researched, wow. How did I not research? Maybe is the better way to say it. All my friends and family are going to be like, oh my gosh, every time we talk to her, we're now part of a research project. But it's just good communication, right? And I say it in a way that you understand very quickly. And what did Mark Twain say? If I had had more time, I would have written less words.
I hadn't heard that one before.
I think that's a quote I think that's a quote by Mark Twain. And so whenever you're thinking about these processes, if you write chapter 5 and then no one understands what you're talking about, just change chapter 5. You got to test out chapter 5 and test out, some of these things.
Yeah. That's awesome. And I think a lot of people get caught up in that whole, I have to make it perfect. It has to be perfect, but it doesn't have to be there it's not all on you. it can be on, I've got this out, let's bring in some other ideas. People think that, and I think a lot of this comes from seeing people in movies, like writing books, like they go off into a cabin and they don't speak to anybody. Like, you don't have to be a monk. You don't have to live in a dungeon. You don't have to go in a cabin. Like, your book is written in community. It's based on everything that has come into your world. And then it also needs to be, kind of massaged by the things that are in other people's worlds too, because we're in our heads and we need other people who are in their heads to see how our words resonate in their heads. So I'm glad you talked about that.
Number one recommendation for writing
Yeah.
a book. And it's not because it's not my authentic voice, but I mean, the first, I think my first book, my first sentence was, this book is probably going to make you mad. And everybody hated it. I loved it. I thought it was fabulous, right? Everybody hated it, right? So I changed that, right? And so much of my, I say, like, we wrote a book, like, I happen to do the majority of the work on it, but that is my biggest piece of advice is, if you get too isolated on it, it's not going to be what you want, because people will give their opinions in your reviews. And it is better to have their opinions in an email before the book goes out than it is to show up in a bad review situation.
Yeah, that is a very good point to put out there. So please, if anyone is writing a book, make sure you're getting some feedback before it's published, because you can easily change a lot of stuff before it's published. Afterwards, it's harder. And you don't want to keep making new versions of your book and putting it out again and again. So I did want to ask you, I know we've been on here for quite a while and I don't want to take up your whole day. So we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier about your opinion on future books. Do you see yourself writing anything else again? Anything on the horizon?
Yeah, I will write a parenting book that goes out when my kids are like 18. Right. I want to get through some of the harder pieces. I feel like I've said, in helping our kids have future healthy relationships and not being a people pleaser. Some of those things, one of the things I say to my kids is, I'll say, what's one thing you can change to make me love you more? And they'll say nothing. And I'll say, why? And they say, because you love me as much as a mommy can love a little girl, or as much as a mommy can love a little boy, right? This is normal language in my house. Another language is everyone makes mistakes, even grownups. Like, you make a bad grade, you make this, it's like everybody makes mistakes, even grownups, right? So at some point that will be a book, because I hope to, but I want to, not put out a book and then they turn 14 and then I think, why did I write a parenting book? That's a respectful part of that process. And then I absolutely want to write a book on solving your toxic people problems, as well as high performance healing. I believe there can be an honors class for healing, and in being really clear and strategic about what problems you're trying to solve and developing. And that's a lot of what my coaching, I think, is already that. But I definitely, that high performance healing. I see a lot of people, they want to participate in growth and they want to, but they're just not connecting the dots. I'll say, what problem are you trying to solve? They'll say, I want to work on boundaries. I said, what are you doing to solve that problem? They say, hiking. I was like, can you give me some data on that? Hikers are less likely to have boundary issues. They're like, no. I was like, then why is that your strategy? Right. I'm not trying to be mean.
No.
That's that, right? That's that person on that racetrack, burning fuel, wrecking their nervous system, having stress, but they're not going anywhere. Right. So my book certainly is a big segue into that. Like, let's get really clear on what problem you're trying to solve, and that's the strategy we're going with, but I can see that going a bunch of different ways.
Yeah, those all sound so interesting. So please, if I miss it, let me know when those are coming out.
I will, yes.
Yeah. So, and I want to say thank you so much for the conversation today. This is really great. I love diving into authors' heads and seeing, their, behind the scenes sort of stuff, but you have this great perspective because you are a problem solver that I definitely wanted to make sure that everybody got to see this in my group and kind of understand, like, not just the nuts and bolts or just the behind the scenes, but how everything blends together. So thank you so much.
are so welcome. Thank you for having me.
Sure. If anybody is watching this and has questions, I forgot to say this at the beginning, please drop in the comments. We are happy to answer them. And as we wrap up here, I did want to mention that your books are out there. People can buy them. Where can they find them?
Yeah, wherever books are sold, that it's Becoming Toxic Person Proof, and then Problem Solved: Simple Habits for Complex Decisions. And both, the subtitle for Toxic Person Proof is Clear the Confusion and Learn to Trust Yourself, which is exactly what the second book is about. It is funny because people are like, did you write on 2 different subjects? And anyone who really follows my work or is a client, are like, no, she did not do anything different. I'm just really passionate about self-trust, self-integrity, self-responsibility, and using those to, without it feeling like a prison, right? But how to be kind without having your kindness used against you, and how to get out of that motion and into movement. I mean, life is too short to stay stuck.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a good quote to wrap up with. Life is too short to stay stuck. So make sure you're making that forward momentum, get in front of your elephant, and get out of the spaghetti thinking.
Hey, your life will be 100% improved. You'll have better relationships, more money, more sleep. You will sleep better. You will eat better. Like it is that easy. And it's, life doesn't have to be that hard. So check out the stuff.
Yes, definitely check out Sarah's books. And if you're interested in Problem Solved, the ebook is 99 cents right now. So make sure you get that before the deal goes away. And Sarah, where can people connect with you?
They can find me, Sarah K. Ramsey author, on Instagram, Sarah K. Ramsey on Facebook. I do always use the K. And it's part of my identity. It's like Sarah Ramsey put up with a lot of things in her life she shouldn't have. Sarah K. Ramsey knows better and does better. And then on LinkedIn or Facebook, I think I said that. My website is sarahkramsey.com.
Awesome. And I will be dropping the link for the website and probably the Facebook below, since we are on Facebook.
Sounds awesome. Thank you.
Yes, thank you again so much. This is wonderful.